Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different.
Oh,
Yeah, we're going to be
right.
talking about the Fremen from Frank Herbert's Dune,
One of my favorites.
and specifically their relationship with the Sandworms of
Those
Arrakis.
giant worms and
Yes.
how they've adapted to this crazy environment.
It's really interesting how Herbert created this whole culture around it.
Yeah, he didn't just make like a desert planet, right? He made like a whole people and their beliefs and
Totally. I mean, think about it. The Fremen, they come from this long line of Zensunni wanderers.
oh yeah.
And they took those beliefs, those like inner strength and spiritual awareness things, and turned them into something totally unique.
So they didn't just survive Arrakis.
No, they didn't just survive it. Like
Embrace
they
that?
built their whole lives around it. And the most important part of that, the sandworms. Shai-Hulud, as they call them.
Oh yeah, that's right. Shai-Hulud.
Giant, terrifying, absolutely essential to their whole way of life. Okay, so let's get back to these worms.
Okay.
How big are we talking here? Like, really paint us a picture.
All right, we're just like big earthworms.
Okay.
We're talking hundreds of meters long, bursting out of the sand. Crystal teeth.
Whoa.
Yeah. They're the keystone species of Arrakis.
Oh, wow. Okay, so they shape your
Everything.
life.
The landscape, the ecosystem, everything.
Okay, so that sets the scene pretty well.
Yeah.
How did the Fremen get so connected to these things? Like, how do you go from
Right.
mystic wanderers to...
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's where those Zensunni beliefs come in. Adapting to hardship, understanding the universe.
Right.
It all led them to revere the sandworms.
So the religion isn't just some abstract thing.
Right.
It's like
For
literally
survival.
how they survive.
It is. And here's where it gets even crazier. The spice, that thing everyone wants, the stuff that prolongs life, makes space travel possible. It's all connected to the worms.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows the spice is important, but...
It's essential.
But what do you mean it's connected to the worms?
Ready for this. Spice is basically sandworm poop.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Processed sandworm poop.
So this thing, this like almost magical substance
With
is
worm poop.
worm poop.
Pretty much. And it's not just a simple process either. You've got these smaller creatures, sand trout. They form pre-spice masses. The worms eat them, process them. Herbert really thought this whole cycle out.
So the spice, the worms, the desert, it's all...
Connected. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, totally. So the Fremen, they need the spice for their economy, but it comes from these like divine worm creatures.
Exactly.
How does that work, like practically and religiously?
Well, they've developed these really intricate ways of harvesting the space.
Yeah.
They respect the worms. It's not just about taking. They see Shai-Hulud as a source of spice, sure,
Yeah.
but also as these like godlike beings, forces of creation and destruction.
So is it almost like a partnership then?
Kind of. I mean, there are cultures here on Earth that have a spiritual connection with the animals they hunt. Right?
Yeah, like a respect for the
Exactly.
animal.
But here, it's not just about food. It's this substance that powers the whole galaxy.
That's a good point.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And it shows how their religion, born from those Zensunni ideas but shaped by Arrakis, isn't about exploiting the worms. It's about respecting them. They even ride them, you know?
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Ride them like on top of these giant sandworms.
On top of them.
Is that safe?
Well, it's a ritual for them, a coming-of-age thing, a test of courage. They use special hooks. They understand the worm's behavior. It's a whole thing.
So they've mastered the desert.
They have. It's not just living in it. They've become part of it.
Yeah, like they're still suits.
Oh, yeah.
Reclaiming.
The still suits are a perfect example.
Yeah.
Every drop of water is precious. They see it as sacred,
And they ride giant worms.
and they ride giant worms. It's all connected.
It's like Herbert saying that what we believe can change how we act towards the world, even in the harshest places.
Exactly. Our beliefs shape our actions, our technology, our whole way of life.
But their environment doesn't stay the same forever, right? Like in Dune Messiah, things change drastically.
That's right. Arrakis goes through a crazy transformation.
So no more desert.
It gets green, lush,
Yeah.
almost paradise-like.
And that messes everything up for the Fremen.
It throws them for a loop, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Their whole way of life, everything tied to that desert.
Yeah.
Suddenly it's all different.
So what happens to the sandworms when there's no more desert?
Well, that's a problem.
I mean, they need the sand, right?
Exactly. Arrakis becomes more hospitable, and the sandworms start to disappear.
So no more spice.
The sand trouts, the little guys that are essential to the spice cycle, they can't survive in this new environment. No sand trout, no sandworms, no spice.
That sounds like a disaster.
It is.
For the Fremen, for everyone.
Right. Remember, this isn't just about ecology, it's about culture. What happens to your faith when the thing you consider divine starts to vanish?
Whoa.
That's the question Herbert's asking.
Okay, so their whole world's been flipped upside down. But the Fremen, they're known for being tough.
Oh, they are.
They adapt.
Yeah.
How do they respond to all of this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. You see different groups within the Fremen. Some try to hold on to the old ways. They want the desert back.
Yeah.
Others, they realize that the desert was just one phase,
Okay.
and they start to adapt
To the new
to
Arrakis.
the new reality.
So they're like looking for a new balance.
They are. And it's not just about finding new food sources or new ways to build houses.
What is it about then?
It's about their beliefs,
Yeah.
their relationship with the Sandworms, their place in this whole crazy universe.
So on top of the ecological crisis, they're having a spiritual one too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their faith was all about Shai-Hulud. They saw these worms as gods, as these forces of nature. But if the worms are gone, what happens to their beliefs?
Yeah.
That's a huge question.
Do they find an answer? Like, can they reconcile losing the sandworms with what they believe?
Well, that's a journey that unfolds in the later books. But what Dune Messiah really shows us is this struggle, this tension between what was and what is. It's not a quick fix. It's doubt. It's questioning. It's adapting.
So it's not like their faith just disappears. It like changes.
It changes. They reinterpret it. They find new ways to express their reverence for life, for the interconnectedness of everything. Remember, their faith was always about harmony with nature. And that doesn't go away, even when nature itself changes.
That makes sense.
Right.
So they're trying to find this new balance, but the spice is still important, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not just about the Fremen anymore.
It's about the whole galaxy.
Mm.
And with the spice disappearing,
Mm.
things get complicated.
So they're kind of thrust onto this galactic stage.
They are.
But they're used to being desert warriors.
Exactly. And suddenly their choices affect everyone. They have to think about their own survival, but also the impact on the rest of the universe.
So it's ecological upheaval,
Yeah.
spiritual crisis,
Yeah,
and now political intrigue.
it's a lot to deal with.
That's a lot for one culture to go through. So does it work out for them?
You know, Herbert's writing is pretty optimistic overall.
Okay.
The Fremen, they're tough. They adapt. They find new ways to express their beliefs, their connection to the planet, their role in the universe.
But they don't just break down under all the pressure.
They don't. They find a way forward.
Okay, so this brings up a question for me. What can we,
Here on Earth.
here on Earth,
Yeah.
learn from the Fremen? Especially now with all the challenges we're facing.
That's a great question. And it's one we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned as we explore the legacy of the Fremen and what they might teach us about navigating a world in flux.
Yeah, because it seems like there's a lot to learn there
I think so.
about adaptation and faith and the future.
Definitely. We've got a lot to unpack.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey so far
Yeah, this is great.
into the world of Dune. Stick around for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into the Fremen story and uncover some surprising insights about ourselves along the way.
Can't wait.
See you there.
See ya.
All right, so we're back and we're talking about Dune.
Back in the world of Arrakis.
Specifically, the Fremen
Right.
and how they deal with some pretty big changes.
Yeah, because remember, last time we talked about how they've adapted to the desert.
Yeah, we talked about the sandworms.
The sandworms, the
Well, the
spice,
spice.
all of that good stuff.
Their whole...
Their whole way of life is tied to this harsh environment.
Right, and then...
And then Dune Messiah comes along,
Yeah.
boom, everything changes.
So, like, how do they handle...
Well, it's interesting
There really is.
because Herbert takes this planet, this incredibly arid planet, and he turns it green,
Whoa.
lush,
So, like a paradise planet.
almost. But for the Fremen, it's a huge shock.
Yeah, like their whole culture was built around surviving the desert, right?
Exactly. Their beliefs, their rituals, their technology,
Yeah.
all designed for that harsh environment.
So what happens to the sandworms when it starts raining all the time?
That's the problem, isn't
Oh,
it?
so you need the sand.
They can't survive in a rainforest.
Right.
As Arrakis becomes more hospitable, the sandworms start to disappear.
And what about the spice?
Well, that's tied to the sandworms, remember. The sand trout, those little creatures that form the pre-spice mass,
Yeah.
they need the sand too.
Oh, right. Yeah.
No sand trout, no sandworms, no spice.
So that's a chain reaction.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction.
And it throws the Fremen into chaos.
I mean, it's not just about the ecology of it, right?
No.
Like, the spice is super important to the whole galaxy.
It's essential.
And for the Fremen, it's tied to their identity.
Exactly. They've built their whole society around it. So this isn't just an environmental disaster, it's a cultural crisis.
Right.
Herbert's asking us, what happens to a culture when its core beliefs are challenged? When the thing you consider sacred starts to disappear.
Whoa. Okay.
It's deep stuff. It is.
And the Fremen, they're known for being resilient.
Yeah. Tough, resourceful.
Right.
So how do they actually respond to all of this?
That's where it gets really fascinating. You see these different factions emerge within the Fremen. Some of them resist the change. They want the old ways back. They try to preserve the desert.
They're like clinging to the past.
They are. But others, they recognize that this is just a new phase in Arrakis' evolution.
So they're trying to adapt
They are.
to this new reality.
To this new reality.
Arrakis.
Yeah. And this isn't just about learning to farm in a wetter climate or building different kinds of houses.
What is it about then?
It's about their beliefs, their relationship with the Sandworms,
Right.
with Shai-Hulud, their place in the universe.
So they're going through like a spiritual crisis.
They are.
On top of everything else.
Exactly. It's like their whole belief system is being shaken to its core.
And their economy's collapsing.
yeah.
And the environment's changing.
That's a lot.
Yeah. That's a lot.
But that's what makes it so interesting. Herbert doesn't shy away from the complexity of it all.
So do they find a way to deal with this? Like, do they figure out how to live without the sandworms?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy answer.
Okay.
Their whole faith was built around the Sandworms, right? Shai-Hulud. They saw them as these divine beings, these forces of creation and destruction.
Right, right.
But with the Sandworms gone, where does that leave their faith?
It's got to change, right?
It does, but it's not a simple process.
Okay.
It's not just a matter of replacing one belief with another.
So what happens?
They have to reinterpret their beliefs. They have to find new ways to express that reverence for life, or the interconnectedness of all things.
So, like, they're not getting rid of their faith.
No, they're evolving it.
Evolving it.
Yeah. Remember, the Freeman's faith was always about harmony with nature. And that principle remains, even as the nature around them changes.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the spice? I mean, that's not just important to the Fremen.
It's the lifeblood of the galaxy.
Exactly. So what happens when it starts to disappear?
Well, that's where the political side of Dune really kicks in.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Suddenly, the Fremen are at the center of a galactic power struggle.
Because they're the only ones who have it.
Pretty much. And they have to decide what to do with that power.
Wow. So they go from desert warriors to, like...
To major players on the galactic stage.
Yeah. Major players.
They have to consider not only their own survival, but also the impact of their decisions on the wider universe.
So it's a huge responsibility.
Huge.
Okay.
And it's a lot for them to handle.
Okay, so we've got ecological collapse.
Yep.
A spiritual crisis.
Yep.
And now they're in the middle of a galactic power struggle.
Herbert really throws everything at them, doesn't he?
He does.
But remember, he's ultimately an optimist.
Okay.
He believes in the power of humanity to adapt, to overcome challenges.
So the Fremen find a way through all of this.
They do. They find new ways to express their beliefs, their connection to the planet, their role in the universe.
Yeah. So it's a story about resilience.
It is. About change, about adaptation.
About hope.
Yeah.
Even in the face of some pretty serious challenges.
Exactly. And that's something I think we can all relate to, especially today.
Yeah, for sure.
We're facing our own set of challenges,
Yeah.
right? Climate change, social upheaval, political uncertainty.
It can feel overwhelming sometimes.
It can. But the Fremen story reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. There's always the possibility of finding a new way forward.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious, what are some specific lessons we can learn from the Fremen? Like, what can we take from their story and apply to our own lives?
That's a great question, and one we'll delve into in the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore the lasting legacy of the Fremen and what their experiences might teach us about navigating a world in flux.
Okay, so we're back talking about the Fremen and this crazy transformation of Arrakis.
It's a lot to process, isn't it? This whole shift from a desert planet to a, well...
To like a paradise.
Yeah, like a green paradise.
Yeah, but not so much for the Fremen, right?
Well, it challenges everything they know.
Yeah, like their whole way of life was built around the desert and the sandworms
And the spice, right?
the spice, yeah.
Which starts to disappear along with the sandworms. So they're facing an ecological crisis, a spiritual crisis, and an economic crisis all at the same time.
It's like everything's falling apart around them.
Pretty much.
So, do they just give up? Or is there a way out of this mess?
Well, that's what makes Dune so compelling. Herbert doesn't offer easy answers. He shows us how complex adaptation can be, especially when it involves deeply held beliefs.
So they don't just abandon their faith.
Not exactly. It's more like they reinterpret it.
Okay, so they're not giving up on their beliefs. They're just,
They're evolving them.
yeah, evolving them to fit this new reality.
Exactly.
So how does that work? Like, how do they reconcile the loss of the Sandworms with their reverence for Shai-Hulud?
Well, they come to understand that their faith wasn't just about the literal sandworms themselves.
Oh,
It was about something bigger.
like what?
It was about recognizing the power of nature, the cycles of creation and destruction, the interconnectedness of all things.
So they're finding new ways to express those same ideas, even though the desert is gone.
Right. They become stewards of this new Arrakis, protecting the balance of these transformed ecosystems.
Okay, so their water discipline, for example.
Oh, that's a great example.
It changes too, right?
It has to. In a world with abundant water, it becomes more about responsible management, making sure it's shared fairly.
So it's not about clinging to the past. It's about
Adapting, evolving.
taking those core values
Yeah.
and applying them to a new situation.
And that's not easy. It takes a lot of courage, a willingness to
Yeah.
let go of what you thought you knew.
And let's not forget, they're also dealing with all this political pressure.
Oh yeah, they're suddenly the most important people in the galaxy.
Everyone wants that spice.
And they're the only ones who have it, or at least the knowledge of how to produce it.
So how do they handle that? Do they become corrupted by power?
Well, that's a question that plays out over the rest of the Dune series.
Okay, so we'll have to wait and see.
Right.
But it's interesting that Herbert doesn't present them as perfect beings.
No, they make mistakes.
They have internal conflicts.
Yeah, they struggle to live up to their own ideals.
So it's a very human story.
It is, even though it's set on this fantastical planet with giant sandworms and spaceships.
Right, and I think that's why it resonates with so many people, even today.
It explores these universal themes of change, adaptation, responsibility.
Things we're all grappling with in our own lives.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, I have to ask, what does all of this mean for us? Like, what can we learn from the Fremen story?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think the most important takeaway is the power of adaptability. The Fremen show us that even when everything we know is changing, even when our core beliefs are challenged, we can find a way to adapt, to evolve, to create a new path forward.
That's a pretty hopeful message.
It is.
Especially in a world where we're facing so many challenges.
Like climate change, political instability, social
You
divisions.
can feel like everything's falling apart sometimes.
It can. But the Fremen remind us that change isn't always a bad thing.
It can be an opportunity.
It can. It can be a chance for growth, for transformation, for creating a more just and sustainable world.
So maybe there's hope for us yet.
I think so. As long as we're willing to adapt, to learn, to grow.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Dune.
It's been a great journey.
Thanks for joining us. And remember, the Fremen story is more than just science fiction. It's a reflection of our own potential for resilience, for hope, for creating a better future, no matter what challenges we face.
Well said.
Until next time, keep exploring.